All right, online folks, I think we should be in business now.
Yes.
All right, thank you all so much. This is Government After 5 p.m.
We're good now. We want to minimize. All right. Good evening, everyone. I'm Abby Feely. I'm the Administrator for Development and Economic Opportunity for the City of Tampa. I was recently appointed to this position in December. Before that, I was heading up Development and Growth Management, which is where the Land Development Code lives. And that really is what people would know as the zoning code for the city. And when I was elevated or appointed to this position, I told the mayor one thing I wouldn't give up is the code, because I've been with the city for 25 years, and this is a huge undertaking for our city. And really, that's why we've even named it Tampa Forward, because this is what will line us up for the next years of our development. Our code hasn't been updated since the late 1980s in a holistic way. We've had private text amendments and public text amendments that have changed portions of the code, but we've never really modernized it to come into the 21st century. So that is what this undertaking is about. I'm super excited to be here tonight, not to totally geek out on you, but I think this is so tremendous for our city. And with me tonight are Clarion and Associates. We did hire a consulting firm to help us. Clarion has been extremely successful in their efforts with local governments to update their codes, because this isn't something, if you know our code today, it's over 1,400 pages. This isn't something that we could do as a staff. This is something we really needed professionals to help us with in order to ensure the process went smoothly and that we had a cohesive way, as many of us aren't really code writers in our everyday lives. So very excited to have Clarion with us tonight. They're going to present to you. It is about a 40-minute presentation on the assessment. What's the assessment? The assessment is the first step of them looking at our code and telling us what works, what doesn't work, and how the heck we're going to update all of this. So it has a roadmap, and that roadmap consists of 8 themes, and those themes they're going to share with us tonight. If you haven't had a chance to read through the assessment, no problem. We do have an online form, though, where we would love your feedback on the assessment. I also wanted to take a moment before we kick off tonight to acknowledge Boy Scout Troop number 56. They're with us tonight. And they are here earning their citizenship and community merit badge. So this is, I think, just a tremendous opportunity to learn about our city. And some of you may find it interesting. I'm hiring for planners, so come on down and join our team and make an impact in your city. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jeff now, and he'll start with the presentation. If you'll hold your questions, comments, and feedback till the end, we'll have an open question and answer period at that time. So appreciate everyone being here tonight. I really do. Your continued involvement in this effort is really what will transform Tampa's tomorrow and move us forward. So we have other touch points. Jeff's going to touch on the schedule of what will happen next after this. But again, thank you so much for coming out tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Abby. Give me just a moment to set this up. As Abby mentioned, a land development code is a really critical part of a city. It's really the building blocks that establish how a city is going to develop and how it's going to look for decades into the future. So we are, because it is such an important part of the city, because really it's a big undertaking to take this very large, multi-decades old LDC and update it. We're taking a very thoughtful, structured approach We think we have a great team together. And as part of this project, we've been reaching out to the general public. We've been reaching out to city staff, members of the development community.
Jeff,
Can you
we
speak
can't.
a little louder?
You got to speak into the.
Is that better?
Behind you, once you're testing. Maybe we're shaking like.
Oh,
Can you all hear in the back? Okay.
you want me to just walk over there?
Yeah, just.
Or just
here.
stay here? Okay. Okay, let's try again. So we've put together a really a good team together, working closely with staff, working with members of the public. We've met with your city council members. We met with the mayor today. We also are fortunate enough to have a great advisory team that's been put together. It really includes a cross-section of members of the development community, neighborhood leaders, and other leaders from people involved in the development in Tampa. So we're really excited. The assessment is a large document. So this is what it looks like printed out. If any of you have downloaded it, it's about 160 pages. So there's a lot to go through. And in order to cover all of that in 40 minutes, we have to sort of keep it up. So I'm going to try to take you through this quickly, but we'll have lots of time at the end for questions. And there we go. So I'm going to start providing you an overview because some of you may not have been here. This may be your first time being involved in a Tampa Forward event. We're going to talk about the Clarion team that's been put together, give you a brief overview of the project schedule, and then we're going to spend most of the time digging in to the assessment. We'll sort of start with a review of the overall structure of the document, the 8 key themes, and then we'll dig into each one of those 8 themes and discuss some of the key recommendations made in each. After that, again, we'll have time for questions and comment. And then following that, we'll tell you what's coming up and when you can expect us to be back with some more material for you to review as part of the project. You don't need to take a photo of this now, but I did want to mention that there's a website up. It's on the Tampa City website. It's tampa.gov/Tampa Forward. So if you take a photo of that QR code on the left, it'll take you right there. We are accepting public feedback on the LDC assessment through March 24th. And that QR code on the right will take you right to the feedback form. We'll throw these up later, so you don't need to take photos now. You can also find the feedback form if you go to the website at tampa.gov/Tampa Forward. Again, we are Clarion Associates. We're a mid-sized planning consulting firm. We have offices in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, as well as Denver, Colorado. We've been around for 33 years, and in that time, we've helped nearly 250 communities comprehensively update their development regulations and gotten those regulations adopted. So we've done this a lot. We've done this a lot for cities of large cities, small cities, counties, and we've done a lot of projects in Florida. So we're excited to have the opportunity to work here. Because Tampa is a very complicated place, we have some partners on here who bring some additional specialized knowledge. Dover Cole & Partners is a town planning firm. They're based in Miami, Florida. They also have an office here in Tampa, and they're going to be helping out with some contextual design standards for some key segments in the city. Hiddleston Associates is a transportation planning and engineering firm. They have an office in Tampa, and they've actually worked closely with the city on a number of projects, including the recent Tampa Moves mobility project. Plan Active Studio is a small firm based in Orlando, which has worked in a lot of Florida communities, including communities here on the West Coast in the Tampa-St. Pete area. They'll be helping out with some of the district standards. What's that now? Oh, okay. Sorry about that. And finally, we're also assisted by Nancy Stroud. She's a land use attorney. She's worked in Florida for many decades, worked on a lot of development codes, is the town or county attorney for a number of municipalities. And so she's helping out overall and with updates to the development review and approval procedures. Apologies. While we wait for the slides to come back, I can give you a little bit of an overview of the project overall. So again, we think it's really important to take a very thoughtful, structured approach. So for this project, we have we have 5 main tasks that are set up. The first task was project kickoff and orientation. That's where we came to the city. You may have been here back last April, where we had a kickoff meeting. We had a survey up on the website where we tried to get input from people as to their key priorities, what they thought were the key priorities of this project. We also reviewed your LDC, your comprehensive plan, other adopted city plans. And we took all that information and used that to develop the LDC assessment. The assessment really is the synthesis of everything that we learned during the project kickoff. In the LDC, okay? I'm sorry, they're having technical difficulties and I don't want to get too far ahead before. That's the correct one.
Yep, you're good.
All right.
The people on the virtual one were not
Mhm.
seeing the slide, this Jeff was going through them. We just want to make sure they're caught up.
So this was the slide I was talking about. So again, we did task 1, project initiation and orientation. And here at the assessment, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. It's important to note that we haven't drafted a single word of the updated LDC. This part of the project is a very important stage. It's basically a bridge. We take everything we learned in task 1, all of the feedback, all of the direction from the plan, synthesize that in the assessment. And we're going to take the feedback that we hear from you here, from the website. We've met with the advisory team, and we're going to take all of that direction, and then we're going to move into task 3, which is the actual writing of the updated LDC. So what we're going to do after we hear all of your feedback, we're going to meet with staff. We're going to discuss if there's anything that we wrote in here, any of the recommendations, any of the direction for the structure and content and organization of the updated LDC that we should change. If so, it's important to note there won't be another version of this assessment, but if there are any significant changes that are made in the direction based on the feedback, we'll put a memorandum up on the website so folks know what's going to happen. When we get to task 3, once we start drafting the updated code, we'll be doing it in 3 installments. And so that's what these little icons are indicated. We will release each of these 3 installments. They'll be available to the public. We'll come back and give another presentation, and there'll be an opportunity to provide feedback. So I just want everybody to know that, we are looking forward to getting your comment now. There may not be anything you feel comfortable commenting on. You may feel more comfortable getting drafts of the updated code and providing comment on that. That's fine. The reason we have this structured process with a lot of opportunity for public input is to make sure that people have the opportunity to participate in this project at multiple stages where they're most comfortable, where they think their input is most useful. So let's dig into it. So as I mentioned, the LDC is a comprehensive review of your current land development code. We look at your current LDC through the lens of the city's goals and priorities. We tell you what works well, and we look at things that maybe don't work as well, and we make suggestions for how they can be addressed in the updated LDC. In addition, we provide a recommended structure for the new regulations. So here's the outline. There's a brief introduction that sets the stage. There's an appendix at the end. The real meat of it is the diagnosis. That's where we have our 8 key themes and recommendations. And that's where we discuss, again, what is working well in your LDC. And there's a lot, and which we will carry forward into the updated LDC, and the areas where we think the current LDC falls short. And we make recommendations for how they could be better addressed in the updated LDC. Part 3 is an annotated outline of the updated LDC. That's the part where we say, if you adopt all of the recommendations in part 2, this is how we propose that the updated LDC be organized. And we'll go over that organization in just a couple slides. So again, these are the 8 code assessment goals and themes. So theme 1 is to simplify, better organize, and make the land development code more user-friendly. 2 is to improve the predictability and transparency and clarity of the development review process. In theme 3, we make recommendations for updates to the zoning districts to better support the types of development that the city wants to see. Theme 4 is a recommendation that the LDC support additional housing types and better encourage the development of affordable housing. Theme 5 is to improve the development standards in the land development code to have better quality design and better implement some of the policies in the comprehensive plan. Theme 6, which you can see most of there, is to protect the character of the city's residential neighborhoods from incompatible development. Theme 7 is to support the revitalization in appropriate locations of the city. And theme 8 is to enhance the sustainability and resiliency of development. So let's dig in. So theme 1 is to make the land development code more user-friendly. So, and I'm just going to try to close this off here so that we can see the whole screen. You still seeing it on the computer, Jennifer? Okay, great. So we have proposed in the LDC assessment a more logical and intuitive structure that groups together like provisions and provisions that really go together. So there are 3 main components of any zoning ordinance, any land development code. The first are zoning districts and uses. Zoning districts, of course, identify the key dimensional standards of land, how tall a building can be, how far the building needs to be from the street or from side property lines. But another key part is how you can use your property. Are you allowed to build a single family house? Are you allowed to build a factory or a hospital? So we are proposing that Article 3 be zoning districts and Article 4 be use regulations. They'll all be consolidated together and cross-referenced to each other and organized in a way that's a lot easier to use in your current ordinance. Development standards are another key component of a land development code. Those are the regulations that get at site elements such as off-street parking, landscaping, tree protection, open space, exterior lighting. And so those will be consolidated in Article 5. Subdivision standards have a lot to do with a lot of those site factors. So those will be in Article 6 right next to each other. And then all of the administrative procedures will be consolidated into Article 2. Most of them actually are in Article 2 of your current LDC, but we'll bring them all together and have some additional recommendations around that. Finally, there are other sections of the LDC that are important too, and they will be delivered alongside the other sections of the LDC. You can't get around the fact that a land development code is a technical document, but there are ways that you can make it easier to use and understand. This is an example from another code that we've prepared that shows some of the design elements that we include to make them development codes more user-friendly. So up top, you have a dynamic header, which illustrates where in the document you are, what article, what major section. We use illustrations that show how to apply some of the regulations that are described in text in the document. To make the document easier to use, we use bold-faced text and white space and nested headings. Also, you can understand how different provisions relate to each other. And then footers at the bottom with page numbers also help orient you into the document. Theme 2 is about the predictability, transparency, clarity, and efficiency of the development review process. And in all the communications that we've had with members of the community, we think this is the part which needed the most attention. We think we're very interested to hearing your feedback about this. So as I mentioned in the last slide, one of the key recommendations is to consolidate all of the administrative procedures into Article 2. As part of that, we're also proposing to include a summary table. So you can see an example there that's taken right out of the LDC assessment. And the summary table is essentially a table of contents. So you can find all of the procedures that apply in the document, whether it's a zoning map amendment or a signed permit or some other type of procedure. It'll be listed in there and it'll show who the key parties are in there. who reviews it, who makes a recommendation, and who makes a decision. There will be a set of standard procedures. So these are procedures that apply to most, if not all, of the development applications. Things such as application submission, review for completeness, public hearing, review by the Planning Commission, review and decision by either city staff or city council. So these are, standard procedures that apply to everyone. So they'll all be in that one section. A consistent format for each specific application type. So again, it'll follow the same order. Having everything be drafted in a consistent manner really helps with making it easier to understand. Finally, one of the things that we'll try to do generally in this update is to reduce duplication. In a number of places, you have the same thing that is repeated over and over again in the code. One example is in your current procedures. Variances can be heard by the Variance Review Board, by the Architectural Review Commission, or the Barrio Latino Commission. There are 3 separate variance procedures in the code. They're almost identical, but they're repeated over and over again. And that just adds pages. It just makes the document harder to use. So one of the recommendations is to consolidate all of those into one. So these are some of the key recommendations included in the assessment that we'd love to get your feedback on. The first is to replace the alternative design exception with a new administrative adjustment procedure. During the project kickoff, one of the things we heard from all stakeholders, from city staff, from neighborhood leaders, really from everybody, is that they did not think that the alternative design exception process works well. So for those of you who don't know, alternative design exception allows staff to administratively, authorize changes to some of the development standards if an applicant applies, and if they determine that it sort of makes sense to do so in a particular circumstance. A lot of those end up being appealed to city council, and a lot of times city council overturns those. And the reason is there are not a lot of good standards for when an alternative design exception should be awarded. One thing that we learned from staff that I think is instructive is that the alternative design exception process came from a process by the same name that the Florida Department of Transportation uses in roadway design, a very different context. So when someone goes to Florida Department of Transportation and asks for an alternative design exception, it's typically because they need to have, a narrower lane than the technical road standards require, a narrower shoulder, and it's generally because, you have a constrained right of way, you have buildings you don't want to tear down, and so you need to narrow the road a little bit. And so in those circumstances, you can apply for an alternative design exception, and there are specific technical requirements that you need to meet. In the context of the Land Development Code, the alternative design exception is being used to determine whether some of the design requirements, such as having entrances face out to streets, whether there can be exemptions from that. And that's a very different context. The question of design is very much a policy question that should be established by the city council. And it's very hard to have a discussion about whether that should be waived in a particular circumstance. So what we're recommending is that the design exception be replaced with a more limited administrative adjustment procedure. This would allow staff to authorize modest changes to some of the dimensional standards, such as front setback, side setback, height, for a defined percentage. It could be 5 or 10%, whatever city council determines is appropriate. If there's some element of the site where that deviation would make for a better project, or perhaps to preserve a tree on the site, or for some other reason that's set out in the code. But again, these would be much more limited. They would not authorize staff they would not give the staff the sort of the broad discretion that they have now with the alternative design exception. The second recommendation is somewhat related to that. So a lot of the appeals to city council come from these alternative design exceptions. The best role for city council is to establish policy, to establish the rules that govern how land can be developed in the city. And that's a very important role. And that's part of, why City Council has authorized this, 2+ year project to update the LDC. Part of the goal of this project is to have clear and precise standards, which, address a lot of the ambiguity that you see in the current code. Now, with a city as large and as complex as Tampa, you can't draft a code that's going to address every possible contingency. There will always be some sort of ambiguity. You try to resolve that over time, but it'll happen. So there will be cases where staff makes a decision and there will be an appeal. But those appeals should be, reasonably limited and also limited to technical issues. And that's what we hope to be the case with the update to the LDC. So the recommendation in the assessment is that instead of having most appeals go to the city council, they would go to a hearing officer. The hearing officer would be a professional appointed by the city council. City council could remove that hearing officer for cause, who would, hear the evidence in the case and make a decision, issue a written decision based on the facts and evidence and the written standards of the ordinance. Other communities have done this. So this is Hillsborough County does that in certain circumstances. And we think that would make your current land development process a lot more efficient. Finally, we're recommending a new neighborhood meeting process at the beginning of major applications. So significant rezonings, perhaps some special use permits. The neighborhood meeting gives the applicant an opportunity to meet with neighbors very early on in the project. It could be before an application is filed. It could be shortly after, to discuss the project, inform the neighbors of the project, and get input from the neighbors before a lot of work has been done on the project, before they've done a lot of engineering and design where it becomes a lot more expensive. And the goal really is to start that conversation early on, so that by the early on in the project and not late in the project, so that neighbors can understand what the developer is going to do. And it gives the developer an opportunity to understand what some of the major concerns of the neighborhood might be. A lot of other communities have similar processes, and they are useful in helping, address some of the concerns at a very early stage. And so that's something that we recommend for Tampa as well. And I'm going to turn it over to Craig now to take us through themes 3 and 4.
Great, thank you, Jeff. One thing that I am beginning this discussion on simplifying and modernizing the zoning districts. One thing Jeff mentioned I want to emphasize is for those of you that are interested in getting more than a general overview of the suggested changes, I strongly recommend that you read this diagnosis. We've got a lot more detail in the diagnosis. We have some nice graphics, examples of how we would restructure tables and things of that nature. So I think one of the key goals, one of the key objectives of the code update is this idea of simplification and modernization that not only applies to the processes, the procedures for reviewing development, but also to just your foundational elements of the zoning code, which are the zoning districts and the use regulations and the zoning standards. In evaluating that issue with respect to the code update, there were several principles or ideas, concepts that we have found to be very helpful in other code updates. And we, looking at your existing regulations, felt like some of these would be very helpful in updating the zoning districts in Tampa. One is this general idea, over the last 50 years, there have been a number of zone districts that have been added. You didn't start with the many zone districts you have in your code today, but a number have been added over time, and they're not necessarily they don't necessarily support each other, and there's a lot of overlap in some of the districts. So one thing we looked at in looking at your existing district regulations is we asked the question, do some of these districts, do they accomplish the same purpose? Do they allow the same uses? Are the dimensional standards basically the same? And is there an opportunity for consolidation? So there were a number of instances where we think, yes, that is something that could be done. It makes the regulations more simple. There's a much stronger focus on achieving the objectives that you want to in the regulation. Second thing we looked, and this is really simple, is to ask the question, are there any zone districts that aren't being used? And there are. So if you're not using them and they don't make sense in terms of addressing the city's development goals, then we suggest they to be deleted. And then, the third sort of issue in looking at the districts is this issue of clarification of standards and dimensional standards and uses when possible. Now, with that said, in other words, all of those types of evaluations were conducted in the context of looking at what zoning districts you have today. But there's also additional policy direction in the plan that really are directing the need for some additional types of development form and some additional development districts. I think a very good example of that is some additional mixed use districts in targeted areas in the community. Another, in terms of dealing with your affordable housing issue, is the need to provide more diverse housing options in a by right. In other words, of allowing them to occur by right without having to go through rezonings, is another example where those types of uses could be added. And there are other non-residential or commercial districts where there's some opportunities, for example, for mixing residential with commercial. So those are sort of the overriding concepts or thinking that we went through in making this evaluation. The other thing in modernizing and simplification is just to make the structure of the districts number one, more consistent, and number two, easier to understand and read. One of the things we've learned, there have been terrific advances in software technology over the last decade or so. It has resulted in the ability to integrate both three-dimensional drawings, photographs, and other types of graphics and tables into a communication format for just laying out a zoning district. So one of the things we propose in the assessment is this will be the new structure. If you, the slide on the far right, and we have examples of that in the assessment. As you can see, it integrates three-dimensional drawings or graphics, photographs, and text. And we propose that this format be followed for every one of the new districts. So there's a great deal of consistency. Starts with a purpose statement. There'll be photographs and illustrations of the desired character and form of the district, reference to the use standards and regulations, a table of dimensional standards on the bottom, a graphic actually explaining how those dimensional standards would be applied, and then to the extent that they're relevant in the district, then they would be identified secondly. So much shorter, easier to understand. Are we? Is that better?
Just speak a little bit louder and switch out your. Testing. There you
did it. Okay, can everyone hear me okay? In terms more specifically about the district structure that we proposed in the assessment, I'm going to basically cover, we organize the districts into residential and the business district, to special districts, institutional districts. But I'm going to start with the residential districts. As you can see on the left side is we identified the existing residential districts on the left, and on the right is how we propose that they be modernized and simplified. You know, using those principles that I laid out a little earlier. As you can see, there are not existing residential districts that you have. And excuse me.
Talk loud.
Craig, just keep talking. I think we can hear you.
You hear me?
Yeah.
I'll try to speak even louder. But I think this is a great example. You have 12 existing residential districts. I'll talk about the 3 that aren't on this table. But what we are proposing is to consolidate a number of those, refine them into 4 districts. And the reason is there's a lot of overlap. What are the new districts? You know, we're carrying forward your existing RS 150. That is the lowest density single family district. Proposing to carry forward but consolidate the RS 100 and RS 75 districts. They are single family districts also. There's not a lot of difference between the dimensional standard uses are the same. So there's an opportunity for consolidation. We're then proposing to take your existing RS 60 and 50, which are your highest density single-family districts, consolidate them. They have lot sizes today of 6,000 square feet and 5,000 square feet. Consolidate them. We're also suggesting that this would be a district where, in addition to single family, there are opportunities to provide more diverse housing options, possibly 2-family, possibly some missing middle housing in these districts, along with design standards to ensure that the appropriate scale and bulk size of those of the development of that district is very consistent with the single family character. And then we are proposing a significant consolidation of your multifamily districts into a multifamily district. One of the things we looked at in proposing these consolidations, and we asked the question, we don't want to create nonconformities. So with that, in the assessment, we proposed what dimensional standards would be used to ensure that didn't happen. One of the other things that we are recommending for all of the residential districts, in addition to most of all of the other districts in your updated LDC, is to not use lot area requirements. In other words, to carry forward lot width, to carry forward setbacks. What we have found in updating our development codes over the last 5 to 7 years is that, number one, it'll simplify the code without affecting the development character that you want. You know, to the extent there are situations in Tampa where lot area is creating nonconformities. It's not a situation where it's affecting character of those neighborhoods. So that's another recommendation that we make. With respect to the business districts, we are generally proposing some modest consolidations, but generally a carry forward with your existing commercial neighborhood district, your commercial general consolidating with commercial intensive, and then consolidating your 2 office professional districts. I will say that one of the things that we do recommend with these districts, as well as with the residential, is the establishment of some basic form and design standards to ensure a minimum level of quality and the character of the proposed districts will be maintained and preserved. Quickly, the institutional districts are carry forwards. The university community is the district that applies to the University of South Florida. Public parks, I think, is self-explanatory. We all are recommending that that district also allow for environmentally sensitive lands that are in public ownership, proposing the consolidation of your industrial districts, and then to address policy direction in your comprehensive plan. We are suggesting the establishment of 3 new mixed-use districts, which may have some sub-districts, but the 3 mixed-use districts would be a mixed-use neighborhood districts, which are scaled to be neighborhood in terms of scale and form. They would be located adjacent to existing neighborhoods or possibly in small intersections. There would be limitations on height, on the scale of the bulk of building. A new mixed-use corridor districts, which would be located in targeted areas along corridors and nodes. Mixed-use regional, which would be your most dense, intense mixed-use district. There are a number of special use, what we call special districts that you currently have. We are generally proposing carrying those forward, consolidating them to the extent that it makes sense to consolidate them. The Ybor City District, we are proposing to consolidate the 3 commercial districts into 1 Ybor City commercial district, doing something similar with the residential districts. We're proposing similar consolidations in some heights, refining some of the design standards. We're proposing a consolidation of the 2 central business districts and also the channel district. Generally, there's a carry forward in municipal airport districts. We're proposing a modernization of your planned development districts, sort of a refinement of some of the regulations to make it easier to understand, to use. And then we are proposing a carry forward of the overlay districts. And then finally, there are 5 districts you currently have that we're proposing as legacy districts. The idea of a legacy district is that the district would stay in place. The intent would be expressed regulations that the elected officials do not want an expansion of these districts, but they recognize that they exist, and someone that has land, property in those districts could develop under the existing district regulations, but they would not be expanded. There are 3 of the higher density multifamily districts that are proposed, residential office, and the 2 residential office districts proposed as legacy districts. Finally, I will mention, how about now? In addition to the sort of the district structure, we are also, and it's integrated in with the districts, are the use regulations. You currently have 8 different use tables in your regulations. We are proposing to consolidate those into 1 use table. This is an example use table from another community. But as you can see, the use table has the use organized. On the left, the uses are identified. Going across the table are the individual districts, and then whether a use is permitted, whether it's a conditional or some type of special use, is identified in each of the tables, in the table for each of the districts. We are suggesting to modernize the uses structure that you have. We have a 3-tiered use classification system. We think that will be very helpful to organize your uses around. The individual uses need to be modernized. Definitions need to be written for those uses that aren't defined today, and those uses that need to have their definitions modernized, we will modernize. We also suggest that you update your use specific standards, which are, specific standards if you develop a certain type of use, like a gas station. Are there special uses that need to be followed? The standards will be in the code. And then we are also suggesting that you consider encouraging and broadening the use of adaptive reuse by allowing additional types of uses in vacant structures to encourage revitalization. So that really is an overview of your districts and your use regulations. One of the other important issues that is identified in the assessment is the need to support a broader diversity of housing types in the community and better encourage or more strongly support of housing affordability. I don't think that there is a broad consensus of everyone we talk to that there is a housing affordability problem in Tampa. And that's not unusual. There's a housing affordability problem in Florida and a lot of other communities across the country. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail of why, other than to say there's been an extensive increase in the price of homes, not only in the last year, but over the last 5 years and even decade. And not only the price of homes, but also the price of rents. To the extent that, the the normal standard definition of affordability, excuse me, in other words, someone being able to only spend 30% of the household income on housing has been far exceeded in Tampa over the last few years. With that said, your comprehensive plan and some of the other studies identify 2 actions that could be taken to improve this issue of housing affordability and housing supply. And actually, before I get into that, this is just one of the things we looked at. In other words, we asked the question, what are some of in your development regulations, what are some of the issues that potentially could be affecting the cost of housing? One thing we do know is supply does have an impact. In looking at your zoning districts, what we found was, in other words, what is in the blue in this table or graph is the percent of zoning district and land that allows by right single, a particular type of residential use. And in the black, what percentage of zoning districts and land allows that use as a special use one, S1. As you can see, many of your districts allow single family detached, 77%. That's what we found. Whereas if you look at other types of housing options, it's much lower. 25% single family semi-detached, about the same number for 2-family, 24% single family attached, 5% for multifamily. 5% of the land right now is allowed, and it's really a by right use. So there is, in your current regulations, there is they only allow a very small or a much smaller or limited supply of what I would call diverse housing options, other than single family housing options. So we think that's an issue. We would suggest to you that is an issue. Some other issues that we also identified in the assessment was that in your what we characterize as your small lot single family districts, the the RS 60 and 50, which has small lots, there are no limitations on the size, or there are very modest limitations on the size of these homes. And what's happening is that in those districts, folks or developers are buying these lots and they're maximizing the building envelope, and they're not building small homes that are more affordable. They're building large homes, and there are ways to address that. Another thing is you have a lot of development impact fees, so that adds to the cost of housing. And then, interestingly enough, at least for us, is that there are limited incentives for affordable housing. The state passed the Live Local Act a few years ago, but there's been very little activity in Tampa to use that. There is only one. There are some incentives to increase density in your site plan districts, and there is one affordable housing subdivision provision that allows some limited affordable housing. So many other communities provide a lot more incentives. So based upon that, what we recommend is, number one, we need to broaden the types of housing allowed by right, not only in some of your residential districts, but also in some of your non-residential districts, your business districts. Secondly, you need to refine and better support smaller scale residential units, not only in these higher density single family districts, but in other locations. You need to update your affordable housing incentives, and you need to think about adding impact fee exemptions for those that build affordable housing. So in a nutshell, those are the issues, and I'm going to turn this back over.
I know if you've looked at the clock and you see we're only through 4 of the 8 themes, but those were the biggest ones. And so that we have enough time to get through, so there's enough time for questions and answers and comments. We're going to go through these next few pretty quickly. But again, full details of all the recommendations you can find in the assessment. So theme 5 is to update those development standards that I mentioned. So to update the mobility, connectivity, and circulation standards. So again, you all have a great study that was recently completed by one of our partners on this project, Hiddleston, that talks for trying to shift Tampa from an auto-only city to a city where other forms of transportation are, not only permitted but encouraged. So we can include regulations for development to have better connectivity for pedestrians, for bicyclists, to make it so you can walk from your residential neighborhood to a commercial district without having to follow a long stretch of roads through the residential subdivision. Updates to the off-street parking and loading standards. This is another area where Kittleson will help us out to help right-size those parking minimums and modernize some of the standards and provide other options for applicants if they can show that they will require less parking than the standards required to allow them to do that. And also perhaps some context-sensitive parking requirements. To update the landscape and tree protection standards. We know tree protection is a big issue. We know this is going to require a lot of thought, a lot of communication with the community to make sure that we're doing the best that we can under state law to protect the tree canopy, to protect the tree canopy, to build on the tree canopy, and also to improve the design of our developments as well as parking lots. And finally, some general form and design standards. We're proposing specific standards for those residential uses, but also to have a set of standard design standards that would apply throughout the city. So these would be, you would continue to have your overlay standards. These would apply more generally. This, helps to improve the visual quality of development, which actually leads in nicely to theme 6, which gets at residential compatibility. This is a very narrowly focused theme, and the goal is to get at those circumstances where you have a largely residential, lower intensity development that's right next to development that is developing as a more intense residential multifamily or some higher intensity commercial. And the goal of these standards are to have measurable and predictable standards that regulate that interface, that boundary line where you have the commercial development that is right up against that residential development. So standards such as requiring that any drive-throughs not be in that area close to the residential development, to make sure there's not outdoor dining in that area, to have the parking circulation directed away from that area. So that's the emphasis of theme 6. Theme 7 is to support revitalization in appropriate locations in the city. We know that's a priority. Some of the council members we talked to noted that as a priority. And so a lot of the recommendations here really harken back to recommendations that we make in other parts of the code. One of the ways that a zoning ordinance can help with revitalization is to get out of the way and to make it easier to do development in areas where there's pre-existing development where you have to redevelop. And so that includes some of the recommendations we've made earlier, such as the administrative adjustment procedure. We will look closely at all of the district standards to make sure that we're addressing any nonconformities. So areas where, it's just really hard for development or to redevelopment to meet the standards of the current code. To encourage adaptive reuse of older buildings, to encourage the retention of some buildings by perhaps allowing some additional uses, maybe a small retail or personal services use in a residential neighborhood where they're desired to keep an older building. And also harkening back to theme 2, to streamline the development review procedure, to make it easier to do the type of development that the city wants to see, can help support revitalization. Theme 8 is a big one. We have a lot of detail in the code assessment. I mean, I don't think I need to mention that issues around sustainability and resilience to storms is a big issue in Tampa. So among the recommendations are to remove barriers to market-driven sustainability measures. There are, the market is innovative. There are ways to develop property in ways that are more resilient, not only to, rising water generally, but also natural disasters. And so there are recommendations to make sure the zoning ordinance is not getting out of the way of those efforts to improve resiliency. Obviously, to encourage development in areas at lower risk of flooding. So have higher intensities where there is lower risk and lower intensities where there's a higher risk of flooding. And one of the recommendations is for a resiliency quotient system. This would be a menu-based series of resiliency options that developers could choose from for their development. We're recommending there be options from 3 categories: risk reduction, shock reduction, and green building practices. And depending where in the city's development is taking place, these standards could be calibrated to require more resiliency measures in areas at higher risk of flooding versus areas at lower risk of flooding. So sorry to rush through those last 4. We do want to get to your input. While we do that, Christian, Craig, Abby, and I will be up and about to answer your questions. I did want to leave this screen up here. Again, this is the QR codes for the website where you can access your own copy of the LDC assessment. And then on the right is a direct link to the feedback form, which we'd love if you have an opportunity to fill out before it closes on March 24th. So I think now we will open it up for questions. Abby, do you want to come out and
have a question or you'd like to provide some feedback, so you want to raise your hand, you can bring the mic around. We do want to try to stay focused on the assessment tonight, and each of these themes in the feedback form does have a separate feedback area, so that you can give specific feedback to each of the 8 themes, if you want to do that as well.
And I think if you're online, Jennifer, are you monitoring?
Yeah.
So, okay, great.
As well, we'll start with here in person.
Thanks.
Just can answer all the questions.
Thank you. As a born and raised Floridian here in the Tampa Bay area, I do think this assessment is very important. I do find it very interesting. I currently own and live in an RS 60 zone, and I am actually very interested in the redevelopment opportunities there. You guys have a line in there that states to keep it single family design. Um, from my own research, and granted, I have a Florida public education, uh, there's several other jurisdictions in the Northeast, out in California, British Columbia, where they have similar language, where on paper it shows that expansion of multiple housing types, but limits actual development by that design standard of conforming to a single family design. I know there's obviously a large portion of people in the community that don't want to see that kind of change. There needs to be a compromise. Wondering if there's maybe a different approach that we could take, since there's been shown to have issues with that type of compromise.
Thanks. That's a great comment. And you're right. There have been communities that have, nominally allowed different housing types, but there are many restrictions which make it, practically, economically, perhaps just from a site design perspective, impractical to move forward with. And that's obviously something that we'll keep in mind. We want to make sure that the development is as compatible as possible with existing development, and that is of a appropriate scale. And so that's something we're going to, need to look at closely as we draft regulations. And we'll, when we come up with the draft, we'll ask you to sort of look at them and see if we've gotten it right or missed the mark. Yeah. Thank you.
Just add to that, I live in the city also. On my street, there's single family, there's townhome, there's 2 quads. And what's interesting is the quads were there from the 20s and came forward. And while we've had the PD that has been used throughout the city, it's very rarely been used to promote missing middle housing. So I think that, and one of the pictures I know Jeff put out was actually a picture from in Tampa of the fourplex to show that if we put the design standards in to guide the form, you almost wouldn't even know that it's not, given the size of what's being built, as single family. I know our neighbors across the bay did 3,000 parcels on their major corridors adjacent to single family resi, to be able to look at introducing those options. We've also introduced ADUs that many people thought, oh, as soon as we do that, we're going to end up with 1 million ADUs. That isn't what has happened. So I think what's more important is that we have the design standards that protect the character of the neighborhood, but also talk to these different forms. We have less than 4% vacant land as we grow. And what we've seen is we've looked at the hundreds of zonings that have been processed. Not many of them are going to the RM district or to the RS district. And that's where in the district consolidation, we're seeing that we have these districts, but somebody hasn't asked to rezone to one in 10 or 15 years, which means that it's outdated, it's not appropriate, but they're using these other spot zoning techniques to introduce these types of housing units, when what I think we really need is kind of the backstop on that is the design standards that ensure we are going to get a predictable development type, which is not what we currently have. So a lot of those smaller details are in what comes next. So I would encourage you to continue to engage with us on that, because that is where we need all eyes on this together to see what keeps our neighborhoods, because we know that's something that's so critical, but also allows us to introduce those other housing types to support and balance out our housing stock.
I've been through the hearing planning process, and my question was, when you were discussing taking it from the city council review to the hearing officer review, you said something about it only being on technical issues. Can you clarify what that actually means?
Sure. The point I was trying to make is that when there are appeals, and there will be appeals, if we do our job right, if the code is written in a way that's clear and straightforward and reasonably easy for people to understand, then the cases where you have appeals should be pretty narrowly focused on technical issues in the code. It should not be the more general question as to, whether a waiver should be allowed to, based on this alternative design exception procedure that really doesn't have very good criteria for staff to make a decision. And that, so what you're looking at is, for this, hypothetical residential development, should the entrances be allowed to face interior to the property instead of to the street? That is a sort of a broad sort of policy question, not the type of, more technical limited question that is really where we would like to direct the appeals process to.
Thank you. One of the data points you had listed up there was multifamily only represents 5% of residential, or I guess I didn't quite understand if you can explain that a little bit more. And I guess how does Tampa compare to other cities you've studied on that point?
Yeah, so that was the bar chart that had the blue bars and the black bars. And so that what that showed was not how much of the city was single family or multifamily, but how much land in the city is open to the different types of housing. So today, 63% of the land in the city, if you own the land, it allows a single family detached home by right. So you can go ahead, buy the land, and build a house. You don't need any special approval. Obviously, you need to follow building code, any other regulations. Only 5% of the land in the city allows multifamily development by right. And again, we have the single family semi-detached and the two family, and more than 5% of the land in the city allows those, but much less than the 63% that allows it by right, that allows single family by right. So the point of that graphic was to show that if you want to build something other than a single family detached house in the city, you're probably going to need to go to city council for a rezoning, which is unpredictable and discretionary. And so if somebody has a piece of land in, say, RS 60, they're going to build a single family house most likely because they can do so by right. They don't need any special permission, and it's the path of least resistance.
It seems to me if you want to increase the affordable housing, one option is to allow people, if you have a single family home, to build, let's say, a garage apartment. Now that's allowed to a degree if it's for what they call a mother-in-law apartment. Of course, now the city you gotta prove that your mother-in-law, she's got to take a DNA test and everything, because you're not grabbing some old lady out of a place so you can build a garage apartment. But I mean, you can increase the supply of housing that way. Of course, the problem here is political. I mean, there are certain city council members think it's a great ideas, and other guys who go to the grave not wanting to do that. What happens right now in Tallahassee as we speak? There is a bill to override local zoning courts, allow people to build a garage apartment. So how can you make that easier? Explain that situation.
We actually did just change the code last year to allow for accessory dwellings, and those are not family related. It does require that the owner of the property live in one of the two units. It doesn't even require that they live in the principal unit anymore. It does allow that, let's say you had a 4-bedroom home, you're older now, you don't need that, you're an empty nester, you can have an ADU in the back, you can live in that ADU, and you can rent the front out to a family. So city council did make that adjustment to introduce that additional housing stock. One of the challenges with that is people who have been homesteaded in their homes for 40 or 50 years, when you introduce a second dwelling onto that property, your taxes go up. So because you now have two dwellings on the property versus one, and you've been under Save Our Homes for 45 years, and now you have, so that is a deterrent to many people. I have a family across the street from me. They've been there 42 years. They have a very large lot. They could have a second unit, but to build it, average cost is 70 to 80,000. And then the tax bill that comes with it, once you put that second unit on it, is a deterrent in offering that as additional housing stock. So I think what Jeff and his team are looking at is how do we even expand that further to look at where it is appropriate for either duplex, triplex, quadplex, not past that, except maybe in the non-resi district. So right now in the non-resi districts like commercial, you cannot even build multifamily in commercial by right. Which would seem like that should be a logical place to be able to put multifamily along our major corridors, or what we call mixed use, which right now is only listed one place in the land development code, which is under storefront residential. We don't even have a district that actually says you should put mixed use along this corridor so that it supports transit, or you get what we call internal capture of trips, and you're not putting trips on the road or cars on the road because I think it passed a couple weeks ago at the corner of Delmever and Kennedy. They're going to put apartments where the Aldi is and where the office building is, so that those people are not getting in their cars and driving down the street to Publix. They can walk from their apartment to the Aldi and get their groceries and go back. So, but right now, I don't want to say our code is draconian in that sense, but there is no district that even by right would allow somebody today to go to build just apartments on a commercial corridor, or maybe there is already these supportive uses next to it that they could then walk to or be employed at, which create those balance of supportive uses throughout the city. So I think that this is our opportunity to lift the code in that way, and to look at what you're saying, and also to look even a little further than that as we go forward.
I did want to briefly build just on the ADU point, and also the point earlier about the missing middle housing. Even if they're allowed in the zoning district in the land development code, there are other reasons why they may not be built. I thought Abby's example of ADUs and the impact on your property tax is a big one. That's a little different in Florida than a lot of other places. But other things that get in the way include the building code. So anything with more than 2 dwelling units in a building, you may be subject to, higher standards, which makes it more expensive to build. And also financing. We have this, very sophisticated mortgage market, which is really centered around single family detached homes on an individual lot, or townhomes. So when you start getting to things like 2 family, 3 family, 4 family, it's not as easy to find financing. So those are things that can get in the way. Let me there were some other folks with questions.
You mentioned that you talked about protecting residential from commercial encroachment. In my community, it's flipping. And you said that there's only 5% of the properties in Tampa that they could pull multifamily, with the exception of PDs and PDAs. So and in my community, the PDs and we've lost all of our commercial and industrial, and that's a huge problem for my community, which does not have which does not have a gas station. We're a food desert. We can keep piling up. Where are those accommodations going to be made? Because we don't have an overlay. We don't have any special protections. So where is that flipping point? And the planning department, the planning commission has done a study, and we've lost over 1,000 acres of commercial and industrial property over the last 10 years or so. Where is that going to be protected? Because if something happens in MacDill Air Force Base, heaven forbid, shuts down, then we have no source of any place to put any employment for our community. Thank you.
No, it's a great point. And I think, the comprehensive plan, which is being updated now as well, that's a separate project, sort of establishes the vision for the community. I think it's I assume a lot of these developments are PDs that have been approved. Yeah. It's a difficult issue, and I think it's ultimately up to the elected officials to decide, how land can be used in the community. So we can, in the LDC, we can provide zoning districts, we can provide tools that the city can use in different parts of the community, zoning districts that can be applied in different parts of the community. It's, up to the community to decide sort of where those are applied and how they're applied.
I just want to talk too about a little bit about the work we're doing on some of the corridors, because there's some corridors, I believe, in the south of Gandy area that if we're looking at as a complementary exercise to this code update, we're looking at some corridor standards. So either neighborhood corridors such as Inner Bay or Beta Bay, then we have more commercial corridors and then more regional corridors. Because I think as the redevelopment happens, unless we have these standards in place to guide some of that and encourage some of it, it won't happen. So in looking at this, we're also doing some corridor studies to come up with some design standards for the corridors.
Yeah, context sensitive design standards. And we'll have more on that. We're working through that now, and we'll have some more information on that. Okay. I'll go to you first and then you.
I just wanted to ask about the coastal high hazard zones. I know that the comp plan refers to no increased density on that. How is the city of Tampa going to deal with that issue?
So the land use, I always say it's like a wedding cake. The land use sits at the bottom layer of the wedding cake, and that's where the land use in the coastal high hazard area all live. The zoning sits on top of that. So the land development code sits on top of the comprehensive plan. Right now, the comprehensive plan is going through an update. The future land use update, as well as the housing and I believe coastal management, is coming to Tampa City Council in the next few months. So that is where some of the policies and the land use related to what's going on in the coastal high hazard area will start. Those policies will guide what the land development regulations then do. So
But you're not putting it in your projection for the future.
yes, we are. We are.
Okay.
We have to see what council does and what they adopt. Some people say there's different tiers of the coastal high hazard area. Coastal high hazard area, south of Gandy is different than coastal high hazard area comes all the way up through Palmetto Beach, all the way up through West Shore, all those areas. So, but it has to start in the policy.
County line.
Yes, ma'am. So, but it has to start at that policy future land use level, and it's implemented then through land development. So that policy level and any changes there have to happen through the comprehensive plan. And Clarion has been.
I'm going to raise this because the downtown core has done nothing but put up high-rise buildings. Part of the downtown core is in a high hazard zone. I mean, so it's like, okay,
Yes, ma'am.
we just went through 2 storms.
Yes, ma'am.
And trying to evacuate is a really important issue.
Yes, ma'am.
Unless they close the bridges on Pinellas County, they're gonna be on 275, they're gonna go Gandy and get on the first town. And anybody that lives in South Tampa is gonna have a hard time evacuating.
You gotta get out ahead of it.
Do it 4 or 5 days in advance.
Yeah, you gotta get out ahead of it.
I think this is probably several layers of that wedding cake you discussed, Abby, and this is more of a comment and an encouragement to go hard on transportation. We're not going to get housing right if we don't get transportation right. So things like I saw parking minimums on there. Is it time to start kind of moving a little bit toward parking maximums? Are we planning bike rooms for all of our housing? And are they big enough? Because I know in downtown, the bike rooms are filling up when it's like 50% occupied in the building. Transit, you guys know all. I don't need to name them all, but just go hard, please.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hi, I just want to say I appreciate that you're looking at the mixed use corridors because there are a lot of corridors like Nebraska Avenue, MLK, and there's residents that live behind those corridors and they can't use those main streets. And I know that's for East Tampa, our CRP is in the make, and we've identified some neighborhood corridors. So I love that. I support that. We really need those corridors be revitalized. And I agree with the transportation. We have residents, we want to be able to walk to places. So I support that. So thank you. So I, like Karen says, go hard on those mixed use corridors.
Thank you.
Hi, a question slash comment about in resiliency. So we've had comments tonight that talk about with our storms, coastal high hazard. We've just been through those hurricanes, but I really don't hear a lot of talk about shade. And I think that I just really want to put to the front of everybody's mind is, look, we got to stay shady, Tampa, because these urban heat islands, I mean, all of the concrete, it is hot. And I happen to live on a street where it's a really interesting experiment to watch. The post person only parks in front of my house because I'm the only one with a shade tree. Right. And so we're doing all of this new development. And I understand that there are things from Tallahassee that are saying whatever they want to say about trees and that we can or cannot protect them. However, we can encourage that shade trees are planted and stop with so much about ornamental trees that are going in everywhere and all of these irrigation systems when we know that these are other impacts. So to be really holistically thinking and, how we can have shade with requirements. And then I also had a question, that was more comment, question about the traditional neighborhoods, which we're talking about in the comp plan. And I didn't hear anything about that, how the traditional neighborhoods that were built before the war that have different distinctions and character that are not historic districts, how are we going to be protected? And what can we do?
Thanks for the comment and for the question. A lot of that, we're going to be carrying forward the overlay standards. To the extent there are other neighborhoods that are not historic, but that have a, definable character, that's an area where, not necessarily through this project, but special standards could be developed for those areas as have been developed for the existing areas that are in the overlay district.
Yes. So I did want to bring up a point that he mentioned earlier about the financing on the difficulty around that. I noticed in the plan that you guys had some affordable housing kind of inlays that could somewhat be considered complicated. Have you guys considered just doing a per unit discount on the impact fee? So as you go from 1 to 2 to 4 to 5, each one of those units get cheaper over time on the impact side to make them more affordable.
So right now, our ordinance does not allow for waiver. And I think it's actually at the state level, not federal level. But we do right now, have water and wastewater connection fee credits if you're doing affordable. I've been working, part of my portfolio includes all of the construction services, building, and inspections. And, we have expedited permitting, and then also, so we have city connection, the water and wastewater connection fee credits, and we have the expedited permitting right now as incentives, but we cannot waive it.
Is that only for affordable housing or for any additional unit beyond a single family home?
Right now, it is only for affordable.
Would that be something you guys would consider?
I think that's something we would have to look at. I think we're gonna see some changes in our community, especially based on the 2 storms and the removal of housing stock, the removal of property taxes associated with houses coming off the market. And also, just some of the other federal changes. So I think it's something we can consider looking forward. I know Councilwoman Hurtak is here. She's the head of our Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, or AHAC, which is required from us getting state housing funds. So I think continuing that discussion, they look at incentives each year for what we can do to continue to promote housing. So, well, there's not anything we wouldn't consider as long as it's within legal, realm, and it I think ends up at a positive for creating that inventory.
Yeah, the only reason why I say that, because I believe we have affordable housing prices, but we also just have a housing crisis in general. So if we can reduce more housing at all income levels, it could help people from getting pushed off the end.
Agreed.
Yeah.
All right. We're at 8:30. Many of us will hang out for a little while afterward. Again, want to thank you all for tonight. It's been amazing. Filled out the feedback form. Please take the opportunity to do that until March 24th. Please share it with your neighbors, your neighborhoods, whoever else might want to listen. We'd love to hear from you.
Thanks, everybody.
What's that?
Yeah. So they talked about it. Yeah.
Credits, but less.
No. There was a few though. It was very. Where is your technology? I tell them about the increase. A lot of my but they have no idea. Or maybe a video of it. Because they want to do devices, so we can wait for you. Yes, I got